Change of voice, our next chapter for verbal ability. Let's now first understand the definition of voice. A form of verb that tells us whether the action is done by the subject itself or it faces the result of action done by others. Sometimes action is done by the subject directly and other times indirectly. For example, he takes tea. Here, the action of taking tea is being done by the subject he directly. And for the next example, tea is taken by him. Here, the action of taking tea is being done by the same subject indirectly. Now, based on this, we have two types of voice. One is active voice and the other is passive voice. Let's first understand what is active voice. When using the active voice, the subjects are the ones performing the action. God loves all men. Birds build nests. Dog eats bones. In these three sentences, the subject does the action. Hence, they are in the active voice. Then we'll talk about passive voice. In passive voice, the verb takes an object. For example, all men are loved by God. Nests are built by birds. Bones are eaten by dogs. Now in these examples, the stress is on the action, then the doer of the action. That's why they are called passive voice. Now after understanding active and passive voice, let's now understand how to convert active voice into passive voice. First, move the object in the active voice to the subject position. Use the appropriate be verb. And what are the be verbs? Be verbs are is, am, are, was, were, has been, have been, shall be and will be. These are all the be verbs. And once you do that, you will convert the active voice into passive voice. Then now let's look at this table and absorb all the kinds of tense and for each tense how active voice is being converted to passive voice and how active and passive sentences are formed. For example, simple past. In simple past, active voice is keep, passive voice becomes is kept. For example, active sentence is I keep the butter in the fridge, and whereas the passive sentence will be the butter is kept in the fridge. Then we'll talk about present continuous. In present continuous, the active voice is keeping and the passive voice will be is being kept. The active sentence for an example, John is keeping my house tidy, and the passive sentence will be my house is being kept tidy. Then we'll talk about simple past. In simple past, active voice is kept and passive voice will be was kept. The active sentence for example, Mary kept her schedule meticulously, and the passive sentence will be Mary's schedule was kept meticulously. Then let's see past continuous. In past continuous, the active voice will be was keeping and the passive voice will be was being kept. And the example of active voice will be the theater was keeping a seat for you, and the passive voice example will be a seat was being kept for you. Then we'll talk about present perfect. In present perfect, the active voice will be have kept and the passive voice will be have been kept. The example of a sentence, I have kept all your old letters. Then we'll convert it to passive. It will become all your old letters have been kept. Then we'll talk about past perfect. In past perfect, the active form will be had kept and the passive form becomes had been kept. The sentence of example, he had kept up his training regime for a month. Now if you convert that into a passive form, then it will be his training regime had been kept up for a month. Then we'll talk about simple future. In simple future, the active voice will be will keep and in passive it will be kept. Example, Mark will keep the ficus, and if you convert that into passive form, it will be the ficus will be kept by Mark. So friends, this is all about the active and passive form used in different kinds of tense. Now let's see active and passive form of different kinds of pronouns. Like in active form, I becomes passive me. Active we becomes passive us. Active you becomes passive you. Active he becomes passive him. Active she becomes passive her. Active it stays as it in passive as well. Active they becomes passive them. Then let's look at the rules for changing active voice into passive voice. Rule 1. As mentioned earlier, the structure of sentence will be reversed in passive voice. The places of the subject and the object will interchange. The subject will shift to the place of object and the object will take the place of subject in passive voice. For example, in active voice, the sentence is he buys a camera, and in passive voice, it becomes a camera is bought by him. So here, camera comes to the first and him goes to the last. Then rule 2. Only past participle form of third form of verb, example eaten, etc., will always be used as main verb in passive voices for all tenses. No other form of verb will be used as main verb. It can be seen in all the examples that we have considered till now. Then the next rule. The next rule says the word buy will be used before subject in the passive voice. For example, in active voice, she drinks water, and in passive voice, it will be water is drunk by her. Next rule. Other words such as with or to may also be used instead of word by, depending upon the subject of the sentence. These words are used in a very few cases. The word by is used in most cases. Let's look at some examples. I know him. In passive form, it becomes he is known to me. In active form, if you take a sentence, water fills a tub. In passive form, it becomes a tub is filled with water. So these are different kinds of rules which will be useful for you while solving these questions. Then let's understand how imperative sentences are changed to their passive form. Now, what is imperative sentences? A sentence that expresses a command or an advice or a request is called an imperative sentence. For example, respect the elders, finish the task. These are all command, advice or request. Let's see the list of examples to understand this conversion. Respect the elders. Let the elders be respected. Finish the task. Let the task be finished. Do not waste the time. Let the time not be wasted. Close the door. Let the door be closed. Wash the shirts. Let the shirts be washed. Repair your camera. Let your camera be repaired. Open the window. Let the window be opened. Help the children. Let the children be helped. Throw the ball. Let the ball be thrown. Collect nice books. Let nice books be collected. So friends, this is all about the understanding of the concept of change of voice. Now let's see a couple of examples to understand the kinds of questions which are asked in verbal ability. In the questions below, the sentence have been given in active or passive voice. From the given alternatives, you have to choose one which best expresses the given sentence in active or passive voice. For example, after driving Professor Kumar to the museum, she dropped him at his hotel. The options are: after being driven to the museum, Professor Kumar was dropped at his hotel. Option B, Professor Kumar was being dropped at his hotel. Option C, after she had driven Professor Kumar to the museum, she had dropped him at the hotel. Option D, after she was driven Professor Kumar to the museum, she had dropped him at his hotel. Now here the right option is option A, which says after being driven to the museum, Professor Kumar was dropped at his hotel. Then the second example, I remember my sister taking me to the museum. The options are: I remember I was taken to the museum by my sister. Option B, I remember being taken to the museum by my sister. Option C, I remember myself being taken to the museum by my sister. Option D, I remember taken to the museum by my sister. Here the right option is option B. I remember being taken to the museum by my sister. So these are some kinds of examples. You can go through more questions through our practice papers.